This was a triumph. I'm making a note here. Huge success.
Hey guys, Kent here with a relatively horrible game. Today, we'll be looking at Fairy Fencer F. As of August 2015, the game is currently on Steam for $32.99. That's Canadian dollars, by the way. It's a bit cheaper for Americans. However, that horrifically poor price tag is what makes Fairy Fencer F a relatively horrible game, especially when compared to today's standard in games. Look at this new Lamborghini. Imagine if the top speed was only 50 miles per hour, and imagine if it was only $120,000. It's cheaper than any other new Lamborghinis. But in a drag race, you wouldn't even be able to beat a 70-year-old woman in a smart car. Even she had a heart condition. It'd even be illegal for you to be on the freeway. Also, before I start, it's important to keep in mind that I've stopped playing the game after about 11 hours of playing. Alright, let's start with the positives. Gotta have the Nihongo setting on, but the voice acting is great. Match that with great humor in the dialogue, and you've got yourself an entertaining experience. The visuals really are gorgeous, but there are quite a few exceptions to that. Alright, time for the negatives. Give me a sec to put on my fire proximity suit. Oops, that's for something else. The level design is really horrible and boring. There's no interaction with the environment whatsoever, and jumping a tiny elevation in the ground or a little crack in the ground doesn't count as level design. That's just terribly lazy. A game that was made in 1991 had more environment interaction within the first 4 minutes than this entire game. The out-of-combat animations are just terrible. It feels very janky when jumping or doing the out-of-combat attack. And the only reason why you would do the out-of-combat attack is to get the initiative in combat. However, the kicker is that unless you were ambushed, you would always have the initiative anyway. So it was pointless to do the out-of-combat janky attack. The only time you were ever ambushed was when you showed your back to the enemy, which is impossible unless you want to be ambushed in the first place. There's a very slow ramp up to any interesting progression in the game. If you've watched a lot of anime, you'd say that the characters are very generic and display a lot of tropes in anime. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I didn't enjoy the characters. It just meant that they were predictable and unoriginal. Alright, they're pretty mediocre. There's certain aspects of combat, such as the transformation, that slow down battles a lot. There are a lot of times when I don't even transform. Even though I get large benefits to my stats in combat, the animation simply takes way too long and I just can't bear to watch it. Imagine watching 3 Sailor Moon transformations every damn minute. The majority of the fairies or the Furies you painstakingly collect for the storyline end up sitting in your inventory collecting dust. Furies boost your stats, however you can only equip 1 to each of your characters, and outside of equipping them you only end up using 1 at a time to do something called world shaping. Which is an interesting concept, but the 50 other Furies you collect end up doing literally nothing. There's very little strategy to battling, despite the battle system being a turn-based battle system. There was never a point in the game when I had to defend or make use of the battle space that you have, because there was just too little of it. Or even the range of your attacks had no significance in battle, because there was just too little space to make any good use of the range of attacks. The system itself was in place to be strategically interesting, but was never needed or used. If there was any use of the system later on, again, I'm 11 hours in, and that means that it's an aspect that's been introduced way too late in the game. Combat is very boring until you level up your character to a certain point, and it takes way too long for that to happen. Grinding wouldn't be so bad if the combat early on wasn't so horribly boring. They introduced the more interesting aspects of combat later on, but it takes a huge amount of boring grinding to get to that point. To elaborate, for every battle you win, you gain something called weapon points, or WP. And in order to make any sort of interesting upgrades, it takes 200 to well over 1,000 weapon points to get anything interesting out of the combat system. And you get around 1 weapon point to at most around 6 weapon points per battle. You average around 2 weapon points per battle due to just how the battle algorithms work, especially earlier on. Which means it takes around 100 to 500 battles to make a single upgrade to make the battle slightly more entertaining. It takes about 3 upgrades for the battle to be significantly more interesting, which means at least around 300 incredibly boring battles before the battle system gets even relatively interesting. Imagine eating the crust of a sandwich for 5 hours before you can taste anything that's inside of it. The worst and probably the biggest offense to the game is a very weak, mediocre, and slow storyline. Having a good storyline is incredibly important to any JRPG to drive the players forward. It is a core of a good RPG, and having a terrible core just makes the rest of the game fall apart. There are a lot of other minor flaws that I can mention, along with the major flaw of having a lack of content, but I would be here all day if I talked about them. In conclusion, there are basic aspects of the game that are just inexcusable due to today's standards, or even the standards of 15 years ago, which makes this game a relatively horrible game. But that doesn't make you a horrible person for enjoying it. Thank you for watching. Please like and share the video and subscribe to me for more relatively horrible game reviews. And don't forget to leave a comment below telling me what you thought of this video or your experience with Fairy Fencer F.